Now that we have everything out of the box, we got to get it on the wall. So let's take a look at how we find the studs and what measurements we need to take in order to have everything line up the way that we want it to. I want to remind you to like and subscribe this channel if you want to be tuned into future videos. This is like part 2 of a multi-part series. And if you've got any questions on what we're doing, leave a question in the comments. I'd be stoked to interact with you guys directly. Before we get into hanging it on the wall and taking all of our measurements, I want to talk about what tools you're going to need. The basic things that you're going to need are a drill. The drill is going to need drill bits, and we're going to use them for pilot holes for hanging the brackets and the UniStrut and this kind of thing. We'll get into the size of the pilot bits that are required and the torque values and all of that stuff later. But additionally, we're going to be using a voltmeter. You got to have one of those on every project like this. We're going to be cutting UniStrut, so I'm also going to be using a reciprocating saw. And I've got a couple of files, rasps, and a Dremel tool for neatening up any burrs that I might end up with on the edge of cutting the UniStrut, because let's face it, a reciprocating saw gives you far from a clean cut. But it's going to be the quickest way to get this thing into 2 even pieces so that we can start taking measurements and getting them on the wall. We're also going to be using a punch-out tool to put the knockouts into the gutter so that it lines up with the knockouts on the inverter. Additional things that you will need include screwdrivers with various bits. We've got a couple of hex screws associated with putting the gutter together, and a handful of flathead and Phillips bit applications on the various breakers, terminals, bus bars, and that kind of thing. So you want to be sure you have a full socket set. You want to have a screwdriver set. You want to have a drill with your drill bits. We're going to look at a couple of different ways to measure out and find studs, but a stud finder is a good tool to have in your kit. In addition to the tools, there's also going to be some hardware that we need to account for. The hardware to mount the UniStrut onto the studs of the wall, and then the hardware to mount the inverter and battery brackets onto the UniStrut. We're going to be using lag bolts for tying in to the studs, and these are 3-inch lag bolts because we're using 2x4 studs as the wooden framing member that we're tying into. We don't want for our lag bolts to go all the way through the stud and pop out the other side. We want it to get a good amount of what is called purchase. You can see all of this threaded portion will be inside of the wood. This unthreaded portion accounts for the thickness of the sheetrock, and so the total length of this accounts for the sheetrock plus the 3 inches of thread embedded into the stud. So these you need to pick up at a hardware store. In addition, the mounts that we're using for the UniStrut, these are called strut nuts. These ones have a spring clamp on them. And these are cool because you can take and place them anywhere into the UniStrut once it's mounted, and they push down with the spring and they rotate 90 degrees and get locked into place. So now we can set custom widths on where we're going to be mounting. As far as how far apart these UniStrut nuts will be, we would use our mounting template. We've got one that came with the inverter. We've got a mounting template that came with the battery. And ultimately, we're just going to line these up with the existing mounting holes on the inverter mounting bracket and on the battery mounting brackets. Whether or not they're directly over a stud won't matter because we're tying into the UniStrut. We're going to use a 36-inch section of UniStrut so that we can tie into 3 studs in order to hang the inverter and the battery. We're going to try to hang it on 3 structural members instead of 2 to more evenly distribute the weight. So that covers what we need to have for tools. We're ready to get this thing hung on the wall after a few measurements, but we need to address the elephant in the room. These pieces of UniStrut need to be cut in half. So I'm using a reciprocating saw with a blade that's rated for metal, and I'm using a new blade because I'm going to try to make as clean of a cut as I can. Reciprocating saws aren't always the cleanest of cuts, so we're going to be prepared to file it down. We may need to make some adjustments. I've got the measurement right in the middle, so let's drag it outside and cut her down. As a reminder, these pieces of UniStrut started out as 6-inch chunks, so 72 inches. What we're gonna do is we're gonna cut them in half so that we have two 36-inch chunks for the inverter. We're gonna do that again for the battery. And the reason is we measured out our studs in the wall as being 16 inches on center. So if we're gonna go 16 inches to the first one and another 16 inches to the third one, that's a total of 32 inches that we've got to span between 3 studs. And this will give us a couple inches on either side. Before I get started, I want to point out I've got my personal protective equipment on, including gloves and eye protection. Use a file to clean up the ends of those so you don't accidentally get a metal splinter or cut yourself, and clean it up off of your driveway or your garage floor so you don't end up with a metal splinter in the bottom of your foot. Now we've got our UniStrut cut down into 4 36-inch pieces, 2 36-inch pieces for each piece of equipment. So what we're going to be looking to do is to find where our studs are and be able to mount our UniStrut into the studs in a way that the inverter's height and its knockouts and the gutter and everything will line up with the battery, which will be mounted over here. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna talk about how to find studs and how to attach UniStrut into the studs, including the size of the attachment hardware and the size of the pilot drill bit we're gonna need. Most of you probably already know how to find a stud, but I just wanna go over a couple of common techniques for doing so that we're all on the same sheet of music and there's no question. The standard is to go through and do the old knock test, right? It's gonna be more hollow where there's no wood behind it. If knocking isn't your strong suit, there are a couple other ways. The one that's way more basic is just to use a magnet. I have this little piece of a neodymium magnet, which is just a really strong magnet. The sheetrock it's nailed into the studs with steel nails, so we can find them with a magnet. And that will also give you a really solid idea of where a stud is. We can also get in and measure. And as I mentioned, we're gonna be 16 inches on center here. This is not 16 inches from the edge. We're about 13.5 inches in here. So it makes it even more imperative to be able to find with almost laser precision where your first stud is, because from there, you should have pretty laser precision with where the next stud will be and where the next stud will be every 16 inches like clockwork. But getting in and finding exactly where they are can take measurements and a little bit of knocking. What I will do sometimes is to use a small finish nail or some kind of a small poking device to probe around where the stud is. I'm not a huge fan of marking up the walls. A person could go through and patch these once they find it. We're gonna be covering this with UniStrut, so I don't think that it's a big deal. In my mind, it's more important to know the direct center of this stud than whether or not I had drilled a couple of test holes to make sure I knew where it was. Now I know exactly where this stud is, one side to the other, and I can make a pilot hole directly in the middle. Now, if you'll notice this initial mark that I made in pencil, I measured it out, I found the magnetic nail, and still, I was not dead on. If I had gone right here with my lag bolt, would I be in the center of this? No. Now we need to make this measurement in a couple of different places, because just because we find the center of the studs doesn't mean we know where vertically we're going to need to place the UniStrut in order to have the inverter be where we want it. The inverter, as I mentioned, we want it to have the gutter that we're going to attach on interface with the knockout on the battery. Some other considerations are how high off of the ground do we want to have the inverter display, for example. This is purely aesthetics, but this is where we get in and decide what our project is going to look like going forward for the entire life of it. So you have a lot of freedom here to be able to get in and really make this exactly what you want. So take time and do it right. I had mentioned that we needed to take a lot of careful measurements. Well, I've gone ahead and done that. With the template in place, we're going to be able to go through and just lay equipment down over the top of it. Now, this isn't something that you will normally see. Installers are doing this. I've done this for your benefit so that we can get in and try to visualize how everything will go together before we do it, so that we set better expectations for ourselves on what the process will look like as we're going through it. I've taken and marked out where our two 36-inch sections of UniStrut are going to go. I've done these in silver. I've also put on the MidNite All-in-One inverter mounting bracket. You can see that the studs that we're going to be attaching into, 3 of them for each piece of UniStrut, I've already gone through and found where the exact center of them is. You can see my little pilot holes kind of around each one. One thing that's important to note here is we're going to be tying into these 3 studs, but for where we want the inverter to be with respect to where the battery is going to sit, it's not lined up with where the studs are, right? We want the inverter bracket to be here so that it lines up with how we want our wall to look. The inverter bracket has the pre-drilled holes here, right? So if you were going to tie in, you would have to either have your inverter be here on these 2 studs or over here on these 2 studs. So another thing that the UniStrut does is gives us the ability to be flexible in where the inverter is placed on the wall. Above the MidNite All-in-One inverter bracket that we have here in blue, you can see 2.5 inches above that is where the top of our inverter is. So we used the dimensions of the inverter and laid it out in green here so that we have a solid idea of where the inverter is physically going to sit. Down here in purple, I've put in where the gutter assembly is going to go. I don't want for it to be an open gap where you can see the wires. The intent here is for the battery and the gutter to be essentially seamless as we can get. Fit and finish is what I'm going for here. And the same is true of the bottom of the inverter. Once we get the knockouts in the gutter for the inverter, we'll need to then consider the knockout from the side of the gutter and into the battery. That's going to give us the ability to have all of our wiring between the 2 things be concealed. If you're a do-it-yourself person, there's a good chance that putting together a gutter assembly is going to be more cost-effective than buying the conduit. If you've never done it before, buying the conduit bender, wasting a couple sticks of pipe, learning how to do it and bending them to the wrong angle and not being able to bend them back without weakening the pipe. There's an art to conduit, and there's going to be an art to getting this gutter fit and finished as well. And it's important to know what the options are. So the gutter is going to be what we're going to focus on once we get the inverter and the gutter on the wall, battery, then we're going to be doing the wiring. Be sure that you subscribe so that you can be alerted when we have new videos coming out. We're not going to be able to do all of this today. Let's get these pilot holes drilled. Each piece of UniStrut is going to have 3 attachments. So there's 3 pilot holes for each piece of UniStrut. So we've got a total of 6 holes that we need to drill here. Depending on the size of the lag bolt you're using, you need to use the appropriate sized drill bit. So we're going to use this drill bit because it is perfectly sized. The diameter of the drill bit is just slightly smaller than the diameter of the threads of the bolt. Now that we've got the pilot holes drilled, we're ready to put the UniStrut in place. Before I tightened everything down, What I ended up doing is taking the inverter mounting bracket and attaching it on to the UniStrut while the UniStrut was still a little bit slack from the wall. And so I dry fitted the bracket onto there, and it allowed me to have the UniStrut be in the exact configuration it needs for the bracket. From there, I was able to tighten up the lag bolts on the outer sets of studs. And then of course, I have to remove it now so that I can tighten down this inner stud, upper and lower, which I've done. And now we're gonna reseat our strut nuts and attach our inverter bracket on and get ready to hang the inverter. 3 of the bolts fitted in pretty nicely. This 4th one is a little bit off. Despite taking careful measurements, things don't always lay out exactly as you'd like them. I'm using a clamp to try to line up the threads. This is the set screw that keeps the inverter from being lifted out of the position that it's in. And then there's this threaded screw here, holds everything together so that you can't pull out or lift up to keep it permanently seated in the bracket. And there's only one on one side. There isn't one over here. Finally, after all of that drawing, planning, cutting, and measuring, now it feels like we have some real progress, and I'm really confident with how well this thing is attached to the wall. So I wanted to just touch briefly on what it would look like adding in a second battery if we ever got to that point. This is where our battery is going to go here, right? And if we wanted to add in a second battery, where will we put it? Over here? Maybe the battery could go here. Except this is a garage door entrance, and this is too close to where a vehicle could impact it. So that area is out. Over here, we have a different spot. We're gonna put the one battery here. Maybe we'll just put another battery over the top of it. Except for I don't like that because batteries are gonna let off some amount of heat, right? This battery will have some convective heat loss. And so whatever convective heat loss it has is gonna end up in a battery that's up here. So now you have 2 batteries operating in parallel that are literally never the same temperature. That's not how you get longevity out of batteries. So we can't put this battery above the other battery either. So probably the only option we have is going to be over here. Here, we'd be able to manage our 10 to 12 inch distances for the corners. And then what we would use would be a corner gutter that would allow us to tie in the 2-inch knockout on the top of the battery and be able to feed it through to the 2-inch knockouts on the top of this battery and back over. So we'd be able to accommodate all of the battery to inverter cables in 2 sections of gutter. And I would really like that. The batteries would all maintain a same temperature. The only thing there is one of these is a lot further away than the other. You're gonna have to find a way to take up the slack of the closer one because its battery to inverter cable length has to be the same as the battery that's further away. The inverter isn't gonna tolerate having different lengths on those wires. We can't have a 3-foot battery to inverter cable and a 7-foot battery to inverter cable and expect those batteries to always play nice with each other because they won't. Your cycles are gonna be super erratic. One battery is going to end up being completely turned off before the other one. These inconsistencies and differences and disparities, this is where the lack of longevity comes from. That's why working with a professional design team is so imperative. There's all these little nitpicky things that need to be accounted for, and it's so hard to try to take it all in one go. I mean, your best bet is to have somebody who is a professional who is used to looking at these things be there to advocate for you along the way. They keep you from falling into the pits. You can't just pick out a list of parts or copy and paste a list of parts from Reddit and then expect everything to fall together the way that you want it to. I've compared it to Crutchfield a whole bunch of times. They specialize in selling audio equipment that works together, and they have this army of people who understand how these parts fit together, who can let you know, hey man, I see you've got 1/2 ohm speakers and a 2 ohm amplifier. Do you need help? That's the kind of help that you need with battery-based solar. 90% of this, all of this is just manual labor, but then that last 10% is this highly technical amount of work that needs to be put in, where if you don't do it all the time, there's a good chance you will struggle. The cool thing about Gigawatt and our family of companies is that we provide you a step-by-step guide. A custom installation guide is what we call it. So if this resonates with you, click the link. Reach out and speak with one of our solar advisors and see if we'd be a good fit for your project. Today we're using this knockout punch kit to attach this gutter on the bottom of our inverter. You can see we're starting with the knockout template here. We have to drill it out with a pilot hole, then use the smaller punch to make a punch big enough to use the bigger punch. So it just takes time. It's fun though. I've got the holes in the gutter all knocked out and pretty well lined up. I'm going through with the punch and trimming up a couple where it wasn't really laser precise and I wanted it to be. But here's these bushings that come with the thing. The plastic bushings penetrate through the knockout on the inverter and the knockout I've made into the gutter and make a totally code compliant metallic raceway without having to screw around and buy a million conduit fittings, at least for the inverter gutter connection. So pretty cool. Inside the MidNite All-in-One inverter, there's a lot going on in here. I want to point out a couple of things in here to kind of orient everybody with what's going on. If you look under here, it says PV1A, and that holds our PV strings in place. This is the DC that's coming from our strings of solar panels. The MidNite All-in-One inverter has 3 MPPT inputs for solar. Each one of them allows you to go up to 600 volts. Right next to where the solar panels come in is all of our communication gear. Here we can plug in our rapid shutdown to the switch on the outside. We've got dry contacts here for being able to control relays. Our generator wiring will come into here. Our CT meters plug in here. Our battery management system for our battery plugs in here. So this is the communication hub for everything that's going on inside of the MidNite here. RS-485 terminals allow you to do some trick and fancy monitoring things. We're going to explore those in a future video. Be sure you like and subscribe. You want to be tuned into the video where we hook up an Arduino to this thing. It's going to be baller. Here's where we have our parallel connections. If we have more than one inverter, we've got to run a set of conductors between the 2 inverters for parallel. So all the communication stuff happens here. Just above that, we start getting into our AC stuff. This is our neutral bus bar. It says neutral. It has a white wire coming into it. It says utility neutral on it. You will notice that it's on these white standoffs. This is what isolates the neutral bus bar from everything that's metal in here, from the chassis ground. The neutral is a floating bus bar. And if we move just to the right of it, here, this is the ground bus bar. And by comparison, you'll see that it does not have white insulators on it. It is connected directly to the metal chassis of the inverter. So neutral and ground are right next to each other, but they're not interchangeable. Ground is ground, and neutral is completely isolated from ground. With this in mind, every system needs to have a neutral to ground bond in order for the inverter to function. If you're tied into grid power, it's code that you have a neutral to ground bond at your main panel. If you have a backup generator that backs up your whole home, then it's likely that you'll have your neutral to ground bond be in your transfer switch. It might be in your generator, but you have to have one by code You cannot have more than one neutral to ground bond. But for those of you who are off-grid, it's worth noting this inverter and other transformerless inverters will not function without a neutral to ground bond. That's all for these bus bars down here. Let's take a look at the breakers and what we have going on there. The MidNite inverter comes populated with a huge amount of overcurrent protection. MidNite breakers are 100% duty cycle rated. Your standard breaker is only rated to have current moving through it at 80% of the breaker rating. If it's 100 amps, it's rated for you to put 80 amps through it. What's a little bit uncommon is to have a breaker that is 100% duty cycle rated, which means that if it's rated for 100 amps, you can put 100 amps through it all day long. Starting on the right side, we've got our AC input breaker from Grid. This is a 100 amp 2-pole breaker. That's 100 amps, 240 volts. It's a 2-pole breaker. We can get in and see down here it says AC input grid, L1, L2. That's leg 1 and leg 2 in electrician talk. Sometimes they'll call it hot 1 and hot 2, or they'll call it phase 1 and phase 2. Those are all talking about the exact same thing. Now, in addition to the AC input grid label on the bottom of the inverter, we can also see on the top, it says AC in grid L1 and the wire is black. Same thing for L2, AC in grid L2 and the wire is red. So we can kind of make sense, okay, grid comes in here, black and red, and it goes off up into the inverter, okay? Our AC output that comes out from the inverter to our backed up loads, our critical load sub panel, if you will, right next to it, the exact same 100 amp breaker. 100 amps, 2 poles, leg 1, leg 2. This is our AC output. So right next to grid input is AC output, right? Our input from grid, our output to the loads that we want to stay on when utility power fails. When you're bringing in your wires from utility, you should have 4. You should have a leg 1, a leg 2, a neutral, and a ground. So 4 conductors are coming into this inverter. So for the sake of discussion, let's talk about our grid input really quick. This is a 100 amp breaker. So based on that, I know it has to be at least a number 2 copper that's coming in here. And we would have our number 2 black, our number 2 red. There are phase wires that come in from grid. The others that come along for the ride are neutral. We've got the same size neutral wire coming from grid, and it lands here at our neutral bus bar. We'll have a ground coming in from grid. It's typically a little smaller than the conductors that are being used, and it lands here at the ground bus bar. So your 4 wires from utility, leg 1, leg 2, neutral, ground. Our output to loads are going to be really similar. We've got a leg 1 out to our backed up loads, leg 2 out to our backed up loads. And so this is our black and red wire that go to our breaker panel where we're running our loads and things that need to stay on when the grid power goes down. And in addition, they also need a neutral and a ground. That's 4 wires leaving the inverter to go to the loads that you want to back up. The input and the output, neutral and ground, they're common. There's not a separate neutral in and neutral out. There's just ground. Now I want to talk about one of the things that really makes this inverter special is all of these breakers that MidNite has included. We're looking at $400 or $500 worth of high-end AC breakers that are in this thing. UL listed 100% duty cycle rated breakers. This is kind of badass, you guys. You don't see this on a lot of inverters. These 3, I know it looks like 6, but these are actually 2-pole breakers that turn on and off together. These 3, these are smart loads, and they allow us to hook up high energy usage appliances or devices, and then we can control when they come on and for how long, or under what circumstances. One example that I get of these smart loads being used, electric vehicles. So let's say there's been a utility outage and you only have what's in your batteries and what's coming in from solar to get you through to the other side. You wouldn't want to take your batteries and discharge every last watt into your electric vehicle. So we can get in and program a smart load output to say your electric vehicle charger will be powered as long as your battery bank is above 50% state of charge. So the ability to control larger loads is a huge plus. The 50 amp breaker, there's a 30 amp breaker, and there's also a 60 amp breaker. These can all be used as smart load outputs. This is our battery breaker over here. It's a 300 amp DC breaker. Below here, they've got their CTs and everything wired in so that they've got laser precision on exactly how much current is moving one way or the other. Moving over here, this is a toroid. It's a ferrite choke or filter for keeping everything quiet. If you look back here, you can see the AP Smart rapid shutdown transmitter that's built in. I like an inverter that's got rapid shutdown built in, and it's not some secondary thing that you have to add in or a third-party extra box with a transmitter and that stuff built in. I love it. Here's an internal fan. You can see this fan is blowing air across all of the components inside of this. This is a NEMA 4X box, right? No air or anything can get in or out of this box. And then the external heat sinks on the back have additional fans that blow across the heat sinks in order to evacuate the heat from inside of here. Just like with the inverter, we wanted to do the same with the battery. Mount the battery on UniStrut right next to and just below the inverter. But that's when I bumped into trouble. If you mount the inverter and the battery on the same plane, the knockout on the battery doesn't line up very well with the bottom of the inverter. In my case, I needed to bring the battery out another 2 inches away from the wall in order to have all the knockouts line up. So what I ended up doing was cutting lengths of the UniStrut to the length where they would sit across the top and bottom chunks of UniStrut and spaced them so that they would hit each of the 4 mounting points on the battery bracket, top and bottom. This took a long time to square up. If only I had used a 10 by 10 gutter. If I had used a 10 by 10 by 24 inch gutter, I would have avoided having to stilt the battery out away from the wall. Stand on my shoulders and go with the 10 by 10 gutter. This is 24 inches, so I would suggest a 10 by 10 by 24 inch gutter for a single MidNite All-in-One. A connection from this MidNite battery into the gutter. I've used a clamp style connector in here. I'm using it for the sake of having a solid raceway. The key here is to take accurate measurements so that you know where your battery is with respect to the wall to be able to line the knockout up perfectly. I had to move all this stuff out of the way so that we can get this battery wrangled over there. All right, so let's see. There's 2 handles on either side. And with this removed, this is structural.
Yeah, I can see that.
So you want to try to get a handle and then on this and see if we're able to just...
I would say, yeah, and then just try to put it right here.
I think we need to try to lift it. Yay.
Good job.
So we didn't end up using the floor jack.
No.
We didn't end up using the hand truck. We didn't end up using the lumber for cribbing. I'm glad that we had all of that.
Sure, right. It's always good to, have options. I think what you would learn from is 2 reasonably strong dudes can hang the battery on the wall, especially if there's nothing in the way. So think of like from the unboxing, right? It's on a pallet when it comes in, when they deliver it. It's on the ground. You unbox it, you break it, you put it on its end, you put it on, just like what we did from beginning to end, 2 people could do it. And I don't know how many people are going to take on this project solo. right? You're going to be able to get your neighbor like, hey, Bob, you mind if, I'll trade you a 6-pack of beer. I need your help. And
Right.
in your case, you call your brother.
Right. Well, thanks for swinging by today and checking out getting the battery on the wall. Thanks so much, Harley.
Yeah.
We're going to have to get some more equipment to be able to wire the battery into the inverter. And we're going to drop in another transfer switch in here in the garage so that we can do our 1-to-1 versus on transformerless inverters to see which one's actually strongest. So be sure to subscribe so that you get access to those videos.